The Governor of the Bank of Canada says that because deficits spilled over longer than they needed to, inflation was longer than it needed to be as well. As a result, the average cost to a Canadian is $3,500. Now, yesterday, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that this government has brought in $50 billion in brand new inflationary spending, contradicting the claim that they would, quote, keep their powder dry. Why are they spending more and making Canadians pay more?
Yeah.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has made it very, very clear that he disagrees with our focus on supporting Canadians. He made it crystal clear by standing and voting against support for families to send their kids to the dentist who couldn't otherwise afford it. That demonstrates the priorities of the Conservative Party to not be there for Canadians and to attempt to austerity as a way of moving forward. Mr. Speaker, we demonstrated during the pandemic that by being there for families, for small businesses, for communities, not only did we get through the pandemic, but we end up with a stronger economy.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Austerity is when 1 in 5 Canadians have to skip meals because they can't afford groceries. That's the austerity that Canadians are living with, 1.5 million of whom had to go to a food bank in a single month. What is the NDP solution? To vote with the Liberals to raise home heating bills by applying the carbon tax and tripling it. Now, this coming winter, we're expecting a 100% increase in home heating bills. Will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to raise the tax and take all taxes off home heating altogether?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What the member opposite just demonstrated is he doesn't understand that what he's been talking about from the very beginning is austerity, is withdrawing and not being there to support Canadians who need it in the hopes that that'll somehow make everything okay. But what Canadians saw during this pandemic, what Canadians are seeing during this recovery, is that by being there in targeted, measured ways, things like making sure that every family can afford to send their kids to the dentist, like making sure that we're giving a top-up to the lowest income renters. Those are things that support people in difficult times, something the Conservatives don't do anything about.
Mr. Speaker, Ontario food bank usage is at a record high because of this Prime Minister's reckless inflationary spending. 46% of those food bank users are there because they can't afford food. 14% are there because they can't afford housing. 11% of those users their wages are being eaten alive by this Prime Minister's inflation. When will the Prime Minister realize the pain his inflation is causing on Canadians, stop his reckless spending, get in touch so Canadians don't have to keep skipping lunch?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, having spoken with many families across the country who are having to rely on food banks, I can tell you that they are also extremely worried about being able to send their kids to the dentist. These are the kinds of things they don't get to do when they're squeezed for resources. Now, as of tomorrow, we are opening applications for support so families of all income levels can send their kids to the dentists. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that member and all Conservatives voted against giving $1,300 for dental supports over the next 2 years for families that needed it.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Speaker, the Trust Fund Prime Minister is completely out of touch. The supports he's talking about are being vaporized by his own inflation. His inflation is going to cost each Canadian $3,500. When my family moved here, we lived basement to basement, while this Prime Minister lived in taxpayer-funded mansions. This is why he has no clue. He's not only driven out investment, he's also driving out newcomers. When will he stop driving newcomers out of this country, get in touch with reality, and stop forcing families into food banks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, while Conservatives continue to focus on personal attacks on me, I will continue to focus on supporting them with support so all families can afford dental care in this country, something Conservatives voted against, with a $500 top-up to help low-income renters, something Conservatives voted against. And indeed, we're continuing to move forward by cutting in half child care fees across the country, something the Conservatives Conservatives campaigned against in the last election. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for Canadians while Conservatives continue to ignore them.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
All the supposed supports that this Prime Minister is talking about are being vaporized by inflation. It's crushing Canadians. The Prime Minister continues to crush them with his plan to triple the carbon tax. It's going to punish Canadians for living their lives, for buying groceries, for heating their homes, for driving to work. And while food bank usage is at a record high, a third of those food bank users being children, this Prime Minister is sipping champagne in a $6,000 per night taxpayer-funded hotel room. These Liberals are out of touch and Canadians are out of money. When will this failed Prime Minister cancel his failed carbon tax?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Let's talk about children. Let's talk about the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, a benefit that the Conservatives campaigned and voted against. Let's talk about the fact that we're cutting childcare fees in half right across the country, making thousands of dollars of difference in the pocketbooks of Canadians, something Conservatives voted against. Let's talk about the fact that kids from lower income families can't go to the dentist because their parents can't afford it. Well, as of tomorrow, they get to get the support to be able to send them to the dentist, which is going to make a huge difference. But unfortunately, Conservative politicians voted against that as well, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the aisle, we will stand up for Canadians. On that side of the aisle, they will ignore them.
Mr. Speaker, a successful agri-food business owner in my riding has shown me his freight bills with large surcharges from shipping companies that have been added due to the carbon tax. This entrepreneur takes great pride in using made-in-Canada inputs, but wonders how much longer he can continue to absorb these extra costs. Will the Prime Minister stop this made-in-Canada inflation and cancel his plan to triple the carbon tax, or will he just triple down and let his carbon tax cancel this entrepreneur's made-in-Canada success story?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know, and I've heard directly from farmers and agricultural producers, how the disruptions in global supply chains, the energy shortages, the challenges we're facing around the world with the war in Ukraine, with coming out of the pandemic, and other issues have contributed to real challenges for many, many families. That's why we're going to continue to step up, even as we move forward in the fight against climate change. We know that protecting our lands and our resources, protecting those families that live off the lands are going to be unbelievably important for decades to come. That's why it's such a shame to see Conservatives continue to have no plan for the future of our environment.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
This government doesn't have a plan for the environment, Mr. Speaker. They have a plan, a tax plan, that they're going to triple. You know, even the Governor of the Bank of Canada has said that the carbon tax is inflationary. And these surcharges are a textbook example of a made-in-Canada inflation. A food processor like my constituent has to pass on those surcharges. The carbon tax is driving up the costs of groceries and forcing more Canadians to the food banks. Will the Prime Minister give people some hope and cancel his plan to triple his carbon tax?
Before the Prime Minister starts, while the questions are being asked, it's nice to see both sides talking to each other, but not across the floor. It's very difficult for us to hear. Alors je demanderais que, si vous voulez...
So, I ask, if you want to talk to each other, please leave the chamber. It's allowed.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to be only Conservative politicians that don't understand that you cannot have a plan for the future of the economy if you don't have a plan to fight climate change. What we have demonstrated over the past 7 years, by making sure that it's not free to pollute anywhere across the country, by making sure we're investing in transforming and decarbonizing our industries, that we're securing good jobs for the future. The investments we're making in steel, in agriculture, in manufacturing, are making a huge difference in creating good jobs for the decades to come for Canadians and communities from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
What we do understand, what Conservatives do understand, is the amount of targets that this Liberal government has hit, which is zero.
Hear, hear.
The cost of government is rising, the cost of living. $54 million for a Rise scam, $6,000 for a hotel room for one night, billions of dollars in corporate welfare. All the while, Canadians are suffering with high rates of inflation, doubling of interest in mortgage payments, and record food bank usage. Will this government finally show a little bit of discipline, a little bit of compassion, and limit their inflationary deficit spending?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We went into the pandemic with the strongest fiscal position of any of our peers, and we came out of it with the strongest fiscal position of any of our peers. And the reason we did that was because we invested in Canadians. We supported small businesses, we supported families, we supported workers, we supported students, we supported seniors. And not only was that the right thing to do because it allowed them, or most of them, to get vaccinated, it also ensured that we would stay strong on our economic recovery. We recovered our 100% of jobs faster than the United States. We're seeing strong economic growth. We will continue to be there with targeted supports for Canadians that need it.
This Liberal government is very disconnected from what's happening in the country. Inflation hurts. Canadians just can't take it. I've been talking for some time about workers who have to turn to food banks, 1.5 million in a month. Young people who have to live in their parents' basement because the cost of buying a home has doubled, and that's just in Quebec. Students who have to sleep in shelters. I'll remind you that we're a G7 country. Does the Liberal government recognize this distress? Can it take real action like not increasing the carbon tax? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about real action. Tomorrow, we're going to open applications for people who could not pay to send their child to the dentist, can get money to send them to the dentist. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that this is going to make an enormous difference in the lives of many families who are struggling to make ends meet. They're going to be able to offer dental care to their children. Unfortunately, in spite of what my honourable colleague has said, she and all the Conservatives voted against these measures that would help families with dental care. The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. He talks about going to the dentist, and I'm talking about going to the grocery store. Citizens are telling us about their distress. The Liberals are ignoring them and will not budge. They want to raise taxes. Every single one of my colleagues here today, and for some time now, has been talking in this House about the atrocious situations that their fellow citizens are going through. I'll repeat my question. Will this Prime Minister and his government cancel their plan to increase the carbon tax? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know full well how Quebecers and all Canadians are concerned about climate change. That's why we've introduced a price on pollution. Unfortunately, the Conservatives want to make it free to pollute throughout the country. We're going to step up our fight against climate change. I want to highlight that places where the price on pollution at the federal level is going to be imposed, families will get more money back per year. So we're going to help families that need help while fighting climate change, which most Quebecers want.